Tonight, we explore the life and mind of Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch painter whose art, madness, and passion turned him into one of history's most misunderstood geniuses. From starry nights to tragic endings, Van Gogh's story is one of brilliance clashing with pain and beauty born out of suffering. His legacy still stirs hearts, inspires artists, and challenges our ideas of success and failure. Before you get comfortable, as always, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories keep you up, other times they put you to sleep. We're working on a few boring ones, don't worry. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soothing hum, and let's dive into the world of Vincent van Gogh together. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in the small village of Zundert, in the southern Netherlands. His birth was quiet, but its timing was haunting. Exactly 1 year earlier, his parents had given birth to another son, also named Vincent, who was stillborn. They buried that child, and gave their next son the same name. Vincent grew up knowing that, just outside the local church, a tombstone bore his name and birth date only a year off. Imagine what that does to a child's mind. He was the eldest of 6 children, born to Theodorus van Gogh, a Protestant minister, and Anna Cornelia Carbentus, a woman with a passion for nature and drawing. His family was religious, structured, and modest. From early on, Vincent was different, sensitive, serious, withdrawn. He often wandered alone through the countryside, staring at fields, trees, and skies. Nature even then spoke to him in a way people often dared. School never quite worked for him. Though intelligent and curious, he struggled to connect with classmates and teachers. He wasn't an easy child, prone to sudden mood swings and long silences. Some described him as intense, even difficult. Others saw him as kind, thoughtful, and deeply feeling. But above all, he seemed to live just slightly apart from the world around him, like a guest in his own life. His younger brother, Theo, would become his closest companion, emotionally and spiritually. Their bond would one day carry Vincent through the darkest moments of his life. But in these early years, Vincent was mostly alone with his thoughts, his questions, and the landscapes of his imagination. He wasn't painting yet. That would come much later. But the seeds were already there. A fascination with nature, an obsession with beauty in the ordinary, and a loneliness that colored everything. Vincent wasn't the type to demand attention. He lingered on the edges, quiet, watchful, collecting details the rest of the world ignored. Even then, it was clear, this was no ordinary child, and perhaps, deep down, Vincent knew he was walking a path few could understand. A life of color, heartache, and beauty was waiting just ahead. But for now, he was simply a child of silence. As Vincent entered his late teens and early 20s, the world expected him to find direction, a career, a purpose. But Vincent's path refused to straighten. Instead, it twisted, stalled, and doubled back. He tried to fit into the mold society offered, but something inside him always resisted. His uncle, a successful art dealer, helped him land a job at the firm Goupil & C. Vincent moved to The Hague, then to London, and later to Paris, surrounded by galleries, collectors, and the business of art. But for Vincent, this wasn't the world of beauty and emotion he longed for. It was commerce, cold and mechanical. His passion faded. He grew moody, withdrawn, and was eventually let go. In London, he fell in love with a woman who rejected him, and the pain was sharp. This heartbreak, along with his growing discomfort in the art world, began a new phase in his life, one marked by spiritual yearning. He turned to religion, hoping to serve something greater than himself. He trained briefly to become a minister, but failed his theology exams. Then he took up missionary work in a poor mining region of Belgium known as the Borinage. There, among soot-covered workers and starving families, Vincent tried to live like Christ, giving away his possessions, sleeping on floors, embracing poverty. The church saw this as fanaticism and dismissed him. It was another failure, another closed door. But in this darkness, something unexpected stirred. He began sketching the miners, the laborers, the people around him, not with polish or technique, but with empathy, with feeling. His pencil became a way to understand suffering, to reflect it, and perhaps to soothe it. At 27, after years of restlessness, rejection, and confusion, Vincent made a quiet decision. He would become an artist, not because it promised success or praise, he had no illusions of that, but because it felt like the only honest way to express what was inside him. His journey to art wasn't one of ambition, it was survival, a way to process the world and his place in it, to turn inner chaos into something others might recognize as beautiful. Vincent van Gogh hadn't yet painted a masterpiece, but he had found something even rarer: direction, and with it, the first true glimmers of purpose. Vincent's decision to become an artist didn't arrive with a bolt of lightning. There was no applause, no sudden sense of mastery. What came instead was effort, hard, uncomfortable, relentless effort. He had no formal training, no academic pedigree, no real support beyond his brother Theo, who quietly began sending him money for supplies and living expenses. But Vincent threw himself into the work. He studied anatomy, perspective, and technique with obsessive intensity. He copied sketches from old masters and filled notebooks with his own. Art became his full-time labor mentally, physically, spiritually. It wasn't a hobby, it was a necessity. His earliest works were dark and heavy. Deep browns, grays, and blacks dominated the canvas. They were not meant to charm, they were meant to tell the truth. Vincent painted peasants in the fields, old women in shawls, worn-out laborers hunched by firelight. He was drawn to the ordinary, to the weathered faces of real life. One of his first significant pieces, The Potato Eaters, was a reflection of that vision. A family sits around a simple table, lit by a single dim lamp. Their hands are rough, their expressions somber. You can almost hear the silence between them, feel the exhaustion in the room. Vincent believed it was honest. The art world dismissed it too crude, too grim, too raw. He was crushed, but not defeated. Vincent wasn't trying to please anyone. He was trying to see. He once wrote, "I want to touch people with my art. I want them to say, he feels deeply, he feels tenderly." And he meant it. He wasn't just painting images. He was painting emotions, his own, and those of the forgotten people around him. Throughout these early years, he bounced between towns and studios, living mostly in poverty. He rarely ate well. His clothes were often tattered. His health declined. But the more fragile his body became, the stronger his artistic voice grew. He was learning to speak with color, with texture, with silence, though still unknown to the world. Vincent van Gogh had become something real, and artist, not of technique, but of truth. His style was forming, his soul was pouring out, and though recognition was nowhere in sight, a storm of creativity had just begun to gather inside him. Tonight, we explore the life and mind of Vincent van Gogh, the Dutch painter whose art, madness, and passion turned him into one of history's most misunderstood geniuses. From starry nights to tragic endings, Van Gogh's story is one where brilliance clashes with pain and beauty is born from suffering. His legacy still stirs hearts, inspires artists, and challenges how we define success and failure. Before we begin, as always, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy what we do here. And let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes these stories keep people up. Other times, they put them to sleep. We're working on a few boring ones. Don't worry. Now, dim the lights. Turn on a fan for that soothing hum, and let's dive into the world of Vincent van Gogh. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853, in the small village of Zundert, in the southern Netherlands. His birth was quiet, but its timing was haunting. Exactly 1 year earlier, his parents had given birth to a stillborn son also named Vincent. They buried that child and gave their next son the same name. Vincent grew up knowing that just outside the local church, a gravestone bore his name and birth date only 1 year off. Imagine what that does to a child's mind. He was the eldest of 6 children, born to Theodorus van Gogh, a Protestant minister, and Anna Cornelia Carbentus, a woman with a passion for nature and drawing. His family was religious, structured, and modest, but from early on, Vincent was different: sensitive, serious, and withdrawn. He often wandered the countryside alone, captivated by fields, skies, and trees. Nature spoke to him in a way that people often didn't. Single quotes. School never quite worked for him. Though intelligent and curious, he struggled to connect. He was prone to sudden mood swings and long silences. Some called him intense, even difficult. Others saw him as kind, thoughtful, deeply feeling, but most agreed, Vincent lived slightly apart from the world, like a guest in his own life. His younger brother Theo would become his closest companion, emotionally and spiritually. Their bond would one day carry Vincent through his darkest hours, but in these early years, Vincent was mostly alone with his thoughts, his questions, and the wild landscapes of his imagination. He wasn't painting yet. That would come much later. But the seeds were already there. A fascination with nature, a fixation on beauty in the ordinary, and a loneliness that colored everything in his teens and 20s. Society expected Vincent to find a career, a purpose, but his path refused to straighten. He tried. He wanted to fit in. His uncle, a successful art dealer, helped him get a job at Goupil & Cie. Vincent moved to The Hague, then to London, and later to Paris. He was surrounded by galleries and collectors, but it felt wrong. The business of art was cold, mechanical. His passion faded. In London, he fell in love. She rejected him. The heartbreak cut deep, and it began a new chapter marked by spiritual yearning. He turned to religion, trained briefly for ministry, failed his theology exams, then became a missionary in a mining town in Belgium called the Borinage. There, Vincent tried to live like Christ, giving away his possessions, sleeping on floors, embracing poverty. The church dismissed him, calling it fanaticism. Another failure, another closed door. But in that darkness, something stirred. He began sketching. Miners, laborers, their worn faces, bent backs, hollow eyes. He didn't draw with polish. He drew with empathy. His pencil became a way to reflect suffering and maybe soothe it. At 27, after years of failure and restlessness, Vincent made a quiet decision. He would become an artist, not for fame, not for praise, but because it felt like the only honest way to express what lived inside him. Vincent's journey into art was one of survival, not ambition. There was no applause, no sudden mastery, just effort, hard, uncomfortable, relentless effort. He had no formal training, no institutional support, only Theo, who quietly began sending money for supplies. Vincent studied anatomy, technique, and perspective obsessively. He copied the masters, filled notebooks with sketches. It wasn't a hobby, it was a lifeline. His early works were dark, heavy, deep browns, blacks, grays. He painted the poor, the forgotten, the potato eaters. One of his first major works shows a family hunched around a dimly lit table. There, hands rough, their faces solemn. Vincent believed it was honest. The art world called it crude, but Vincent wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to see. I want to touch people with my art. He once wrote, I want them to see. Feels deeply, he feels tenderly, and he meant it. He painted not for approval, but for truth. Throughout the 1880s, Vincent bounced between towns, barely surviving. Poverty weighed on him. His health declined, but his vision grew stronger, his voice more distinct. In 1886, he moved to Paris, where the art world was changing. Impressionism, pointillism, light, movement, emotion. His colors shifted from shadow to sunlight. Earth tones gave way to yellows, blues, reds. He painted self-portraits dozens each, revealing a different layer of his psyche. In some he stared directly, challenging the viewer. In others, he looked away, lost in thought. They weren't about vanity. They were about truth. Still, Vincent struggled in Paris. Too loud, too fast, too much. He needed space, light, peace. In 1888, Vincent left Paris for Arles, in the south of France. He dreamed of building an artist's haven, a studio of the South. He rented the now famous Yellow House, painted sunflower yellows, and envisioned a creative brotherhood. There, he painted sunflowers, starry nights, orchards in bloom. His brushwork danced with emotion. That autumn, Paul Gauguin, his friend and fellow painter, Vincent was thrilled. He decorated Gauguin's room, eager for collaboration, but the relationship soured. Gauguin was prideful, aloof. Vincent was sensitive, volatile. Their dream dissolved into argument. Then, December 23, 1888, Gauguin stormed out after a fight. That night, Vincent, alone, spiraling, took a blade and severed part of his own ear. What drove him? No one knows. Desperation, grief, a cry no one could hear. He gave the ear to a woman at a nearby brothel, then collapsed. He was hospitalized, then ostracized. Theo rushed to him. Gauguin left and never returned. Vincent was fragile and emotionally, but he still painted. From his hospital bed, he painted the courtyard, the bandaged self-portrait, and the red vignette. the only painting he ever sold in his lifetime. Eventually, he checked himself into an asylum in St. Rami. His room had bars, but they gave him a studio, and in that quiet agony, he painted nearly 150 works in a year. Among them, the starry night irises wheatfield with rep of the bedroom. He poured chaos into color, suffering into light. He swallowed paint in despair. He hallucinated. He forgot what he had painted, but he kept going. What would life be, he asked Theo, if we didn't have the courage to try anything? In May 1890, Vincent left the asylum and moved to Auvers-sur-Oise. Under the care of Dr. Paul Gatchett, he painted more than 70 pieces in 70 days. Wheatfields, churches, twisting trees. Emotion poured from his soul, fast and urgent. Then, July 27th, he walked into a wheatfield, carrying a revolver, shot himself in the chest. He survived long enough for Theo to reach him. His final words, "The sadness will last forever." He died 2 days later, in his brother's arms. Vincent died thinking he had failed. He sold one painting in his life. He was dismissed, mocked, unrecognized. 6 months later, Theo died sick, grief-stricken. But Theo's wife, Johanna van Gobena, believed in Vincent. She preserved his paintings and letters. She shared them with the world. The silence gave way to color. The madness was redefined as genius. Vincent's name rose, then soared. Today, the Starry Night hangs in the MoMA in New York. Sunflowers is among the most recognized paintings in the world. His letters are studied for their insight into creativity and suffering. Vincent showed us that struggle and genius often intertwine, that from despair can come something luminous. A man who was never celebrated in life became a symbol of everything art can be. Beneath a quiet hill in Auvers, Vincent lies beside Theo, two brothers, forever linked, by blood, by belief, by legacy. The names may change, the instruments may shift, the songs may evolve, but the soul of jazz plays on, softly, boldly, always. The calm before the storm. The morning of December 7, 1941, began quietly at Pearl Harbor, a vast naval base stretching along the southern coast of Oahu, Hawaii. The sun rose gently over the Pacific, casting a golden light across the calm waters. Palm trees swayed. In the breeze, seagulls drifted overhead. The U.S. Navy's battleships, gleaming in the morning light, rested peacefully at anchor. For most stationed there, it was a typical Sunday, a day of rest. Some slept in, grateful for the slower pace. Others sipped coffee, wrote letters home, or read the newspaper. Church services were being readied. Breakfast was served in the mess halls. For a few lucky ones, it was a day to stroll the beach or head into town. There was no reason to be on alert, no tension, no sign of danger. Though Hawaii was strategically important, it felt far removed from the wars raging in Europe and Asia. Life at Pearl Harbor moved with comfortable routine. Aboard the battleships, sailors scrubbed decks, kept watch, checked logs, mechanics inspected gear. The Arizona, the Oklahoma, the West Virginia, and others, massive and powerful, sat quietly, alive with activity, unaware of what was coming. At nearby airfields, rows of American planes stood exposed on open runways, unguarded. No one expected anything out of the ordinary. Everything felt normal. But just over the horizon, a Japanese strike force was already in flight. More than 180 aircraft, flying low and undetected, heading straight for Pearl Harbor. The sky breaks, open at exactly 7:48 a.m. The sky changed. Without warning, the first wave of Japanese planes swept down from the north. 183 fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes appeared suddenly, engines roaring as they descended toward the harbor. To those on the ground, it was unreal, a sound and sight that didn't belong to Sunday. The peaceful morning shattered instantly. Machine gun fire, bomb blasts, and screaming engines filled the air. The attack was devastatingly precise. Japanese planes targeted American battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and airfields in tightly coordinated waves. On the ships, sailors ran to their stations, many barefoot, half-dressed, still waking up. But there was no time. Bombs exploded on decks. Torpedoes slammed into hulls. Planes dropped like thunder from the sky. Dotted airfields like Hickam and Wheeler, chaos erupted. Aircraft lined up wing to wing became perfect targets. Hangars burned, barracks crumbled. Men grabbed rifles and fired blindly into the sky. The USS Arizona took a direct hit to its forward magazine. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. A column of fire shot into the sky. The ship began to sink. Hundreds of sailors trapped. Below, the USS Oklahoma was hit by several torpedoes and capsized in less than 15 minutes. Desperate sailors banged on the hull, hoping for rescue. Some were saved. Most were not. The harbor's surface, now covered in burning oil, ignited as sailors leaped into the water to escape. Smoke choked the air. Alarms rang. The attack continued. 90 minutes of chaos. The assault lasted just over 90 minutes. But in that time, a peaceful harbor became a war zone. The illusion of safety, of distance from global conflict, was gone forever. Pearl Harbor had been built as a symbol of strength, a fortress of steel and sea. But that morning, it was laid bare. The Japanese targeted the very heart of American naval power, the Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships rested in the harbor. The Arizona was struck early. The bomb that hit her magazine caused a blast so powerful, the ship lifted from the water before sinking. 1,177 men died in an instant. Most were never found. The Oklahoma rolled over. Hundreds were trapped inside. Only a few could be rescued. 429 lives were lost. Other ships, West Virginia, California, Nevada, were hit hard. Torpedoes ripped through armor. Fires broke out. The Nevada attempted to steam out under fire to avoid blocking the harbor entrance, a desperate act of heroism amid the chaos. In total, 21 ships were damaged or destroyed. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, airfields, and fuel depots were also hit. The harbor, once a place of precision and peace, had become a floating graveyard. Fires burned for hours. Bodies were pulled from the water. The oil still leaks from the Arizona today. The Japanese attack was tactically successful. Not a single enemy ship was lost, but something more powerful than steel had been awakened, and the world would soon feel it. The human cost while ships burned. It was the people who bore the true weight of that morning: sailors, soldiers, nurses, civilians. The attack claimed 2,403 American lives. Over 1,100 were wounded. On the Arizona alone, more than 1,000 perished. Many of the fallen were barely adults, some just out of high school. They enlisted in peace, but died in war, without warning or the chance to fight back. Yet in the chaos, bravery emerged. Sailors dove into flaming water to rescue shipmates. Others manned anti-aircraft guns with bare hands. Medics converted mess halls into triage centers. They used belts as tourniquets, kitchen tables as operating beds. Supplies ran out quickly. Back at the Naval Hospital, doctors worked non-stop. Blood stained the floors. Stretchers were scarce. Some stories haunt forever. The knocking from inside the overturned Oklahoma. The helplessness of watching a friend engulfed in flames. The silence afterward. Some men survived, the only ones from their crew. Others bore burns, scars, or deafness. Many carried the trauma for life. They lived through it, but were never the same. The bigger picture: Pearl Harbor was not random. It was planned with ruthless precision. Japan's military, under Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, had prepared for months. They knew war with the US was inevitable. The US had imposed sanctions and a crippling oil embargo in response to Japan's aggressive expansion in Asia. Facing dwindling resources, Japan had two choices: retreat or strike first. They chose to strike. The goal: crippled the US Pacific Fleet, and by time 6 months to a year, to secure dominance in Southeast Asia. The attack was designed to shock America into negotiating, but Yamamoto had doubts. He warned, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant." He was right. A nation responds. On December 8, 1941. The United States was no longer the same. Across the country, people huddled around radios. They heard President Franklin D. Roosevelt deliver a short, firm speech. He began, "Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy." In just 7 minutes, Roosevelt gave voice to the grief and fury of a nation. Congress voted for war. The only dissenting vote came from Representative Jeannette Rankin. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the US. The US responded in kind. In less than a week, America was fighting on two fronts, in Europe and the Pacific. The change was immediate. Isolationism vanished. Debate ended. Unity surged. The arsenal of democracy factories that once built cars now made tanks and planes. Young men lined up to enlist. Women joined the workforce in record numbers. Rosie the Riveter became a national symbol. Communities rationed food, collected metal, and bought war bonds. America became the arsenal of democracy, outproducing all Axis powers combined. Alliances solidified. The US stood beside Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. The goal: total defeat of fascism and imperialism. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been meant to destroy American power. Instead, it unleashed it. A legacy forged in fire. Pearl Harbor changed the course of history. A quiet morning became a global inflection point. From its ashes rose a united, determined nation, one that would help liberate the world. Pearl Harbor was not the end. It was the beginning, and the world would never be the same. A legacy that defined generations. For those who lived through the attack on Pearl Harbor, the war didn't end when the bombing stopped. Survival came with a heavy burden. In the days that followed, the harbor grew quiet again, but not in the same way. The once calm, reflective waters were now littered with wreckage and streaked with oil. Burned-out ships sat half-sunk in. The air held the acrid stench of smoke. Divers descended into twisted hulls, not just to retrieve equipment, but to recover the dead. Some bodies would never be found. For the survivors, the trauma couldn't be left behind. Many had lost bunkmates, brothers, friends, men they'd eaten breakfast with only hours earlier. They had seen raw horror, ships erupting, sailors leaping into burning water, entire crews swallowed by the sea. Some bore visible wounds, burns, shrapnel injuries, broken limbs. Others walked away untouched physically, but haunted by memories. The sounds, the smells, the images came back in dreams. Some never spoke of it again. Others relived it daily. This was the invisible weight of survival. Many wrestled with guilt. Why them? Why had they lived while others died, trapped or torn apart? These unanswerable questions lingered long after the war had ended. Yet in time, many found purpose through remembrance. They shared their stories. They visited memorials. Some returned to Pearl Harbor year after year, standing quietly at the USS Arizona Memorial, gazing down into the waters where their shipmates still rest. Over the decades, their voices became part of a larger memory, one that carried not only loss, but resilience. These men and women, some still teenagers on that fateful day, brought the memory of Pearl Harbor into everything they did. The families they raised, the careers they built, the nation they helped rebuild. They didn't seek glory. Most never called themselves heroes, but they were. A day that opened the world's eyes to attack on Pearl Harbor shattered a sense of peace, but what emerged was even stronger. The will to endure, to rebuild, and to carry forward the memory of those who never came home. Today, Pearl Harbor is more than a military base. It is a place of reflection. More than 80 years have passed since that morning of December 7, 1941. But the memory remains vivid, preserved in history, passed down through generations, honored by all who walk its shores. Where explosions once rang and sirens wailed, there is now a solemn hush, interrupted only by lapping waves and the hum of boats. At the center of that remembrance floats the USS Arizona Memorial, a stark white structure spanning the sunken battleship below. It does not seek grandeur, only reverence. Beneath it rest the remains of over 900 sailors, entombed in rusted steel. Drops of oil still rise from the wreck, slow, black tears, drifting to the surface, a quiet, enduring symbol of sacrifice. Every year, survivors, veterans, families, and visitors from across the world come here. They read names etched in marble. They bowed their heads. Some place flowers in the water. Others simply watch, silent, as history stirs beneath the waves. A memory that demands understanding. Remembering Pearl Harbor is not just about honoring the dead. It is about understanding what was awakened that day. A nation's strength, a people's unity, the resilience of those who lived on. As the years pass, the number of living witnesses continues to shrink. Most who were there are now gone, but their stories endure in letters, interviews, museums, and memorials, in classrooms, documentaries, and the quiet moments between grandparents and grandchildren. Pearl Harbor teaches more than history. It teaches peace, vigilance, and remembrance. It reminds us how fast the world can change, how deeply loss can be felt, and how critical it is to learn from the past so we don't repeat it. December 7, 1941, was a day of devastation, but from its ashes came determination, and through remembrance, that spirit continues to guide us. Pearl Harbor is not forgotten. It lives on in silence, in reverence, and in every name spoken aloud. The first watchers of the sky long before science, before telescopes and observatories, there were only the skies and the people who watched them. In ancient Babylon, stargazing didn't begin with tools. It began with wonder. Night after night, before clocks, calendars, or electricity, people looked up. There were no distractions, no light pollution, just an endless, clear night sky, sharp, quiet, and full of mystery. The Babylonians didn't see stars as lifeless orbs. They saw them as living signs, the gods' movements across a celestial stage. They believed that what happened above would echo below, and despite having no lenses, no satellites, and only handwritten math, they began to map the heavens. They observed that certain stars rose at the same time every year, that the moon moved in phases, that Venus would vanish and return. These weren't fleeting discoveries. They were the product of devotion. Fathers taught sons, priests trained apprentices. Knowledge passed like flame from torch to torch. For Babylonians, sky watching was essential to agriculture, religion, even politics. The stars could foretell famine or fortune. They could bless a king or warn of his fall, and so they watched. From rooftops, temple courtyards, and eventually from towering ziggurats, their land made it possible. A civilization of watchers. Ancient Babylon lay between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was a land of contrast, fertile fields fed by irrigation, vast deserts, and an unbroken horizon at night. The heavens were crystal clear, in a world without electric light. The stars weren't hidden, they were ever present. The sky became a dome of stories. This land birthed one of the world's first great civilizations, rich in trade, law, language, and religion. But beyond what they built, the Babylonians nurtured a connection to the heavens. They believed their gods moved across the sky, every star, a sign, every shift, a message. The stars measured time. Calendars followed the moon. Seasons were predicted by the reappearance of certain constellations. But the sky wasn't just a clock, it was a warning system. A missing star might mean war. A red Mars beside the moon might signal a king's death. They studied these signs with care, convinced that if read correctly, the heavens could reveal the future. The Babylonian landscape, with its vast skies and slow rivers, invited this reflection. There was time to look up, and reason to dot in this land, between two rivers, under the ancient sky. Knowledge began to take root, part science, part faith, entirely devoted to the stars. The first astronomers in Babylon, stargazing was a sacred duty, reserved for a trusted few. These were the astral priests, part scientists, part prophets, members of a religious class known as the Baru, whose task was to interpret signs from the gods. Among them were those who looked skyward each night, reading the stars like divine text. They weren't ordinary priests. They were educated in mathematics, writing, and disciplined observation. They carved their findings onto clay tablets in cuneiform, the world's first writing. These records didn't just log what was seen. They offered meaning. A comet, an eclipse, a strange shadow. Each was interpreted and recorded. The priests believed the sky was not random. It was ordered, intentional, the voice of the gods. Their observations guided kings. Wars were declared or avoided based on planetary motion. Crops were planted after lunar approval. And though they worked from temples, their methods were scientific. They tracked planetary movements, phases, and lunar cycles. Over time, they even began to predict celestial events. This knowledge wasn't hoarded. It was shared, passed down, refined. Each priest built on the work of those before, watching, recording, believing. They weren't just observers. They were interpreters of the cosmos. Ziggurats, towers to the sky, in the heart of Babylonian cities. Great towers rose ziggurats. These stepped, pyramid-like structures weren't palaces or tombs. They were sacred, meant to bridge earth and sky. Each ziggurat honored a god, but they also served a practical purpose. High atop them, away from firelight and city noise, priests found the perfect vantage point to observe the stars. These towers became the world's first observatories, built not with science in mind, but with faith, purpose, and an unshakable awe for the heavens above. They rose and set, tracking the moon and planets, searching the skies for signs from the gods above. The most famous of these sacred towers was the Etemenanke, the ziggurat, dedicated to the god Marduk in the heart of Babylon. Though only ruins remain today, ancient texts describe it as soaring hundreds of feet into the sky, an immense presence at the city's center, visible for miles in every direction. From these heights, the priest astronomers worked in silence. Cloaked in robes, they observed the stars with trained, discerning eyes. Each night, they recorded their findings on clay tablets, which were carefully stored in the temple libraries below. The night sky became part of a vast and growing archive of story told across generations. Climbing the ziggurat was more than a ritual, it was both spiritual and practical. The higher they ascended, the closer they felt to the gods and the clearer the stars became. These platforms had no domes, no telescopes, yet they were intentionally designed, solid foundations, aligned with key celestial events. Some ziggurats were even oriented with the cardinal directions, revealing a deep and deliberate connection between architecture, astronomy, and faith. In Babylon, the sacred and the scientific were inseparable. Every brick in a ziggurat supported more than a structure, it upheld a worldview, one where the sky was not just mysterious but meaningful. And at the top of those ancient steps, the world's first astronomers reached upward, not just to see, but to understand. Night after night, the Babylonian sky came alive with motion. To the ancient stargazers, this wasn't chaos, it was choreography. The heavens moved in patterns, and to the trained eye, those patterns held meaning. Of all the celestial bodies, the moon and Venus held special significance. The moon was a familiar presence of a changing, yet reliable. The Babylonians tracked its phases in great detail. New moon, waxing crescent, full moon, waning. They carefully followed its 29-day cycle, aligning their calendar with its rhythm. Lunar months became the foundation of timekeeping. Religious festivals, seasonal rituals, and agricultural events were all determined by the moon. They noticed that eclipses, rare and unsettling, seemed tied to the moon's phases. Over time, they began recording not only when eclipses occurred, but where in the sky they happened, and under what phase of the moon. These records grew so precise that they began to predict such events, using nothing more than careful observation, and memory passed across generations. Then there was Venus, the morning and evening star. To the Babylonians, Venus wasn't just a planet, it was the celestial embodiment of the goddess Ishtar, symbol of love, war, and fertility. Venus was bright and swift, often disappearing from view, then returning in a new place. This unusual looping movement fascinated the priest astronomers. They tracked every appearance, its first rise in the morning, its last setting at night, how many days it vanished. Through this meticulous work, they discovered Venus's cycle, 584 days, the time it takes for Venus to return to the same point in the sky relative to Earth. This level of precision is astonishing, achieved without telescopes, using only the naked eye and centuries of continuous observation. They also tracked Mars. They noted its forward motion, its slowdown, its sudden reversals, what we now call retrograde. To many later astronomers, retrograde motion was a mystery, but to the Babylonians, it was already on record. To them, the sky was alive, each planet, each moon phase, each blinking star a moving part in a divine mechanism. Through patient night after night watching, they saw what others missed, a grand rhythm behind what seemed random, and they were determined to follow its steps. To most ancient people, a lunar eclipse was terrifying, mysterious, divine, and ominous. One moment, the full moon gleamed in the sky. The next, it darkened and turned deep red, as if the gods themselves were veiling it. But for the Babylonians, eclipses were not terrifying, they were anticipated. Using only their eyes, patience, and centuries of records, they became the first known civilization to predict eclipses. No telescopes, no glass lenses, just clay tablets, symbols, and extraordinary diligence. They observed something others missed. Eclipses followed patterns, and those patterns repeated by comparing records across decades. They discovered a cycle, what we now call the Saros cycle, roughly 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. After that span, the Earth, Moon, and Sun would return to nearly the same alignment, and a similar eclipse would occur again. They didn't know why it worked, not in the modern scientific sense, but they knew that it did, and they used this knowledge to forecast eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Dates we can now verify through modern astronomy. When they recorded an eclipse, they didn't just mark the date, They noted how long it lasted, how much of the moon was darkened, and even what the sky looked like before and after. These descriptions etched into cuneiform tablets still survive. Some even included interpretations. An eclipse on the 14th day of the lunar month. It might spell danger for the king. An eclipse early in the month. Perhaps a warning for the people. To the Babylonians, the sky wasn't just a calendar, it was a code, a living script waiting to be read. That they could do this, predict celestial events so accurately without modern instruments, is a testament to their dedication. It was work done slowly, over centuries, each generation refining what the last had seen. They didn't just admire the eclipse, they understood its rhythm. They turned fear into foresight, mystery into mastery. If you want to understand how the Babylonians saw the stars, you don't need a telescope, you need a tablet. Buried beneath the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of clay tablets. Many are records of trade or royal edicts, but among them are fragments of something even more timeless: the stars, etched in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of the regent. These tablets contain the earliest known astronomical data. They list planetary risings, lunar eclipses, solar positions, star clusters. They are simple in form, but staggering in importance. These tablets were not decorative or metaphorical. They were data, patiently logged, night after night, not for beauty but for understanding. One of the most famous collections was found in the city of UK. There, tablets from as early as the 7th century BCE contain Venus observations, when it rose and set, how long it vanished, and the pattern of its cycle. These records show not just observation but recognition. The Babylonians knew these motions repeated. Their numerical systems were advanced. They used a base 60 system, what we still use today, to divide time and angles. They could calculate time, measure arc distances across the sky, and determine the length of lunar months with surprising accuracy. Some tablets even include procedural texts, early mathematical instructions to model planetary motion. These were not guesses. They were the beginnings of science. Today, scholars have matched many of these records to real celestial events, eclipses, planetary alignments, all confirming that over 2,500 years ago, the Babylonians were looking up and recording it all. But the tablets tell us more than numbers. They show us a mindset, a way of thinking, a people who didn't just observe, they archived, preserved, and passed it forward. Long after the stars shifted, long after their temples crumbled, their words endured, waiting beneath the earth to speak again. In those clay tablets, the ancient sky still shines. To the Babylonians, there was no line between astronomy and astrology. The stars weren't just lights, they were messages. The sky mirrored life below. Each celestial body moved by divine will. The moon, the sun, the planets, these weren't just natural objects. They were the eyes and hands of gods, and their motion was meaningful. When a planet moved strangely, or an eclipse shadowed the moon, it was a sign. A king might be in danger, a war might rise, a city might fall. To ignore the heavens was to ignore the divine. Priests developed long lists of omens, texts connecting specific sky events to earthly outcomes. These were compiled in a massive collection called Enuma Anu, and Lel, dozens of tablets filled with astral interpretations. If the moon is eclipsed on the 14th day, the king will die. If Venus rises in the west and shines brightly, peace will come. These signs shaped real decisions: war, coronation, trade, marriage. And yet, their astrology was not guesswork. It was rooted in data. They knew the planets cycled. They knew eclipses returned. They didn't always know why, but they knew when a priest might hold one tablet showing star positions and another listing omens, and to him, there was no contradiction. In Babylon, belief and calculation were one. Astronomy tracked the stars, astrology gave them meaning, and in that sacred dance, the Babylonians found something powerful, a way to bring order to chaos, to find purpose in patterns, to understand life by reading the sky. Today, we observe the universe through telescopes and satellites. We name galaxies, map dark matter, and measure space in light years. But behind every discovery is a spark, lit thousands of years ago by civilizations like Babylon. Though their kings are forgotten and their temples dust, the Babylonian legacy remains etched in clay, written across the heavens. They gave us more than myths. They gave us methods, their basic math, their lunar calendars, their eclipse records still confirming modern dates. But their greatest gift, a mindset, the belief that the sky could be known, that it held answers, that it meant something. They looked up, not just in wonder but in search of understanding. Ziggurats no longer pierce the skies. Their tablets now rest in glass cases. But the spirit of those early stargazers remains in the astronomer studying a comet, in the child asking why the moon changes shape, in the scientist still chasing the unknown. Each time we chart a planet or name a constellation, we walked the path. They began from rooftops, from courtyards, from sacred towers. They had no lenses, no advanced math, just curiosity, patience, and oesh. From the land between two rivers, beneath ancient stars, the Babylonians built a bridge between heaven and earth, and across that bridge, we still walk, quietly, humbly, always looking up.